In other lessons, we've covered the way we can change the aesthetics of chart objects, changing the colors, the border colors, the fonts, and the font colors. In the next couple lessons, we're going to explore some of the configuration aspects that apply only to the horizontal and vertical axis. Beyond simple formatting, there's some pretty significant options we can apply to both the X and Y axis. So let's start off on our axis formatting tab, and we're going to look at the horizontal or the X-axis, and that is the bottom area of your chart, and it'll have the labels grouping the categories together. And in this one we just have dates 5/5, 5/6, 5/7, 5/10, 5/12, and 5/15. Now the X-axis can generally represent different series of data. It can be products, regions, categories, or anything, but it is also pretty common to represent a range of dates. Now we can bring up the Format Axis dialog box by clicking on the axis at the bottom, and then on our Format menu underneath the charts, you see our current selection is the horizontal axis. We can go to Format Selection. And now we have the Format Axis dialog box. Now most of these we're not going to go over. The glow and soft edges, shadow, line, fill, text box, and font. Those apply to formatting and how the axis is going to look in respect to size and color, and we've kind of covered that already. What we're going to really pay attention to in the X-axis is the scale. Okay, now right now if we look at this particular dialog box, we see the horizontal axis type has three types: automatic, text, and date. Like we talked about, a lot of times you want to have that X-axis be your date range. Now if you look at the range we have now, there's a couple issues. It shows each date 5/5, 5/6, 5/7, then 5/10. There should be 2 days between 5/7 and 5/10. Now we might not have values for those days, but in this chart it looks like they're right next to each other. It doesn't look like there's any separation. So we might need to make that axis be a date range. And watch what happens when we do that. When we click date, you'll be able to see that Excel inserted all the dates that are not part of our data, but it makes the chart look a little better. Let's go ahead and click OK so you can see that. And you see now how we see 3 days of data, then 2 days we didn't have data, and then another day, and another blank day. This probably makes sense, but in a column chart it looks a little odd because you're just missing values here, and sometimes it can be hard to connect what's happening. So where this really comes in handy is if we change this chart type to a line chart, and I'll just select the 2D line chart, you see what happens there. Where the dates do not have data, Excel just creates the line from the last point that had data to the next point. And you can really see how that whole series of data is trending. It'll kind of interpolate or carry over the dates that don't have data. And that can be really helpful. Well, let's change this back to column for now, and we'll go and open and back up our Format Axis dialog box. And we can right click that, and it might be off the screen, but there's a Format Axis choice there as well. So we're on date, and if you notice there's certain options here which we're going to go over. If I go back to text, the options change. Okay, and in automatic, Excel will pick the best type of data based on what's there, and you see it correctly guessed it needs to be a date. So let's explore the options under the date tab. So now you have a minimum date and a maximum date. Typically these are just going to be the first and last data points in your series, but you might want to plot a month to date chart. So if you did that, you might change this minimum from 5/5 to 5/1. And then you see it made spaces all the way back to the beginning of the month. And you might want it to go to the end of the month. So you could just say 5/15 to 5/30. And now you see we have a complete month's worth of data and have that chart going based on the dates we have data for. So let's go ahead and go back to the Format Axis options, and we're going to change these back to the min and max. And I'll modify this real quick. And we'll just click the minimum and the maximum values for our date range and click OK. And now we're back to where we started. So let's go ahead and look at the rest of those options. So we did the minimum, maximum. You can choose a base unit. If you've got several months of years worth of data, you can have it depict the data in months or in years. Then you can have the major units just 1 day. I could have the major unit be 2 days, and that's pretty much only going to determine where it puts tick marks and labels. And then where the vertical axis crosses. Now typically the vertical axis is always going to be to the left of the first data point, but you could have it cross somewhere in the middle if you wanted to. The other option is to have the vertical axis cross the maximum value, which would put it on the right side of the chart as opposed to the left. Now if we go back to the text option for the horizontal axis, we have a couple other things. Vertical axis crosses a category number, we'll just say 1, and an interview between labels. We're going to have 2, and if you notice on our chart, we've got 5, 5, then 5, 7. There's no label here. If I change that to be 1, then it puts the label there. If I have it be 3, it takes the label out. And again, this will apply if you have many more data points than 6 or 7. With our data set, we pretty much want a label on every one. Interval between tick marks, just 1. You see that little tick marks placed between each data point. And the label distance from axis. And that's just going to show the distance between the actual data points and where the text for that axis label is. If I made it 100, you see it's real close, and 500 is a good amount of separation there. We could also choose the categories in reverse order. In our case, it would switch the dates around. Now you're going 515 down to 51. And that's about it for the scaling options of the horizontal or x-axis. We just went over some of the more important aspects of modifying the x-axis as it applies to what type of data is actually along the axis. You really do have a lot of control over how to display the data using your axis options.